100,000 people throughout the U.S. who are on the waiting list. Which waiting list? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Some statistics show that 21 people a day die throughout the U.S. while waiting for an organ donation. According to the Mayo Clinic, 100,000 people in our country are on the waiting list to receive an organ donation. On this show, I will talk to 2 transplant recipients and 2 members of the California Transplant Donor Network, an organization that focuses on organ and tissue donation. So let me introduce my guests. On my far left is Isabel Stencil Burns. Isabel is an author, social worker, health educator, patient advocate, and public speaker. She has worked more than a decade with organizations such as the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford University and Mission Hospice and Home Care. Isabel is also a transplant recipient. Beside her is Gilda Gopal. Gilda received a kidney transplant after spending 4 years desperately waiting for one. To my immediate right is Marissa Jimenez. Marissa has served as the family care educator with the California Transplant Donor Network for over 10 years. She is a social worker by profession, and she has conducted research that is focused on the families of organ and tissue donors. Ayanna Anderson is the West Bay Community Development Liaison for the California Transplant Donor Network. In her work, she regularly travels to 6 Bay Area counties to talk about organ and tissue donation. Now, Marissa, I think your name is Jimenez, right?
That's correct.
I didn't.
That's correct.
Yes, I realized that I didn't quite have the accent right.
That's fine enough.
Thank you. So, when we talk about organ and tissue donation, what are we talking about? What does that mean for you, Isabel?
Organ and tissue donation to me means life and the gift of life, the ability that all of us have in passing life on to people after our death. Also means quality of life. My sister died and unfortunately was not able to be an organ donor because of cancer, but she gave her cornea, and so 2 people can now see with her eyes.
And she was a twin sister.
Yes,
Your
she
twin.
was. Yes. Yeah. I have a picture of her here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And her name is?
Annabelle, and she's the one that I'm kissing. Yes, and she saw many wonderful parts of this world, and she loved nature and hiking.
And
so
she just died in September, this past September?
2013, yes. But I feel like if other people can see through her eyes and see perhaps what she's seen symbolically, that provides tremendous comfort for me. That death isn't final. Death can, actually we can defy death through organ and tissue donation.
Sure, and we'll have a chance to talk more about it. Gilda, what does it mean for you, an organ and tissue donation?
It helps me a lot because I waited for so long for transplant for someone to give me gift of life, and 4 years is very hard. It takes a lot of courage waiting for that one, and while waiting for that, I still work full-time at work, and it's very, very hard because I have families, most of my families went through the testing for tissue, but none of them matched my tissue, so I gotta wait 4 years, and finally I had my transplant February of 2006, and I'm so thankful for the family of my donor who gave me the gift of life, and life is good.
Yes, we'll talk more about it. So Marissa, when people talk about organ and tissue donation. What does that mean for you?
My perspective is a little bit different. Ayana and I work for the organization that connects recipients that connects the organ and tissue donor families with the recipients. I belong to a team that directly works with families who have just been told the worst news of their lives. And we share information with them so that they can make the best decision for their loved one about organ and tissue donation. And many of those families say yes and help people like Isabel and Gilda.
Ayana.
For me, when I think of organ and tissue donation, I first of all think about the wonderful volunteers and ambassadors we've worked with since I've been with CTDN, which is about 5 years. Seeing them, hearing their stories about what the gift of life has meant for them and the transformation that they've experienced. And I also give pause when I think about the need being so great. And when I started this job 4.5 years ago, the number of people who are on the national transplant list has only increased. And so for me, I know that the need continues to be huge, that my work is not done, and that I must endeavor to continue bringing a culture of donation into the communities of the Bay Area and beyond.
Sure. Now, Marissa, you said that you work with donor families, and many of them say yes, but some of them say no.
Yes.
Yes, and what happens when they say no?
Well, we respect that decision. I belong to a team, a group of people who have extensive grief training and family support training. And our goal is to provide a safe space for this family who is grieving, to provide a place where they can make a decision that goes with their fundamental family values.
So, at what point do you approach a family, and how do you know which families to approach?
That's a very good question. So we only make contact with families whose loved one has been declared brain death or is facing imminent death, and the family has made the decision to withdraw support to humanely let them pass.
So the family has decided to withdraw life support.
If they are brain dead, we meet with them, or if the family has decided to withdraw the ventilator, yes.
Okay, and when a family says no, that's interesting. What do they say to you?
When a family says no, we offer the same support that we would to any other family. And families in that moment, they have so much grace and they have so much resiliency that a lot of the families that say no say it because they feel like organ donation is not right for them.
For their loved one.
Yes.
So why do you think, Isabel, Gilda, families would think it's not right for their loved ones?
I think sometimes families are not informed about the facts of donation. People carry around a lot of myths like organ donation will kill their loved one, when that's not necessarily the case at all. I also think culturally, people grow up with different views of death. I come from an Asian family, and I've done a lot of advocacy in Japan, and their death is part of superstition. So anything related to death is considered dirty or bad luck. So the idea of giving your organs to someone else feels really uncomfortable. And those are values that have been passed down thousands of years, and they're hard to change for this new concept called organ donation.
So how can you say to people, if that's their belief, that this isn't something that's dirty or this isn't something that's unclean? And how do you explain to them that we're not killing your loved ones? I mean, what is it that they think if you say your loved one will make a donation, that that the doctors will not continue the support that they're giving them? Mm-hmm. So how do they interpret that as killing their loved ones?
Well, I think going back to sort of education, that's where Gilda and I have a huge responsibility, because both of us were saved. Mm-hmm. And so if we can go out as recipients and say, look, this is what our donor families have done for us. We're alive. And if we can represent the good part, the benefit, the value of organ donation, that can counter some of the perceived negatives of organ donation. But again, it's a deeply personal value, and I think that every family has to understand donation and truly be educated about the benefits, and then they can make their informed decision.
Well, Isabel talked about some of the myths. Are there other myths that she hasn't covered that people
Sure.
might have about
Yeah.
organ donation?
So I do community education, and I'm out on the front line, and I hear lots and lots of responses back from people who do subscribe to various myths. We definitely hear sort of the self-governing myths like, I'm too old, you know, my health is too poor. So again, what we tell everyone is, if you have an altruistic desire to help others, sign up and register. Should that opportunity come up, our savvy medical team will make those determinations if you are too sick. We don't have upper age limits. So to Isabel's point, we are constantly educating the community and addressing these sorts of things all the time. And as well, as she mentioned, there is a bit of a superstition where some people do think if they talk about end-of-life decisions, that perhaps they're hastening their own death, or they feel that it's
Yes, there is the idea of what you think about, you bring about, right?
correct, correct.
So we're all going to die anyway.
Correct.
So.
So what we do is we talk about the need for being more educated and to have conversations. We really push that. Have conversations with your family about end-of-life decisions and organ and tissue donation, so that if you are in fact interested in this, it's not just a solitary decision, but your whole sort of community knows about it. And that helps a great deal, obviously, when the families know this is something my loved one talked about many, many times. So of course I want to honor their wishes, much like we would do if we have a loved one who feels, you know, a specific way about cremation or about burial. It's just about honoring your loved ones.
Sure. Marissa, Ayana just now talked about, and Isabel also mentioned education.
Yes.
Do you find a difference in the way people react depending on their education levels? Have you noticed anything?
What I've noticed is that organ donation and transplantation is such a new concept for a lot of people, regardless of formal education or where they've lived, or if they've immigrated from a different country. It's such a new concept, so a lot of people are still trying to understand it. So once they receive the information about what it means, and most importantly, that every single person who becomes an organ and tissue donor will be treated with great dignity and respect, families consider that as a possibility for their loved one. So it varies, but many families do receive information from many different places, and sometimes the information is correct and sometimes it isn't. And that's why our team, the family team, works so hard to provide that space so that they can make that decision, an informed decision.
So do people, you can be alive and make a donation?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can be a
Yes.
living donor.
Yes,
Absolutely.
for example, a kidney. You can give a kidney. Well, is there another organ that you can give while you're alive?
Yes.
Yes.
You can be a living liver donor. We're
Well,
starting-
that's a section of your liver.
Correct. The lower lobe of your liver.
Okay.
And in some instances, lung.
Lung. You can give a lobe of your lung.
So as far as medical advances, we're encouraged by that,
Can
certainly.
you give a piece of your skin? I was reading that skin tissue is usually taken from the back of a cadaver. Can you give a piece of your skin while you're alive? I guess that you would have to fight the possibility of infection.
That's not something we cover in our organization.
I think that's most common with someone who donates for themselves, a patient who has a surgical procedure, but that's different from
Sure.
organ and tissue donation
Sure.
in a deceased or someone who's passed away.
Sure. So, as a recipient, Isabel, tell us your story.
Well, I was born with a serious lung disease called cystic fibrosis. So from the very beginning, I had a hard time breathing. At the time, my parents were told I'd be lucky to reach 10 years of age because it was a fatal disease.
And your sister had it too.
Yes, being
You
identical
were identical twins.
Yes, so it's genetic, and we both had it. So we really lived a lifetime of breathlessness, of coughing and fighting for every breath. We had to do a lot of medical treatments. We're in the hospital over 60 weeks of our lifespan, and it was a very hard life. And many of my friends with cystic fibrosis died. But since we were able to survive and we took care of each other to be able to survive, we lived long enough for the technology of lung transplantation to kind of become a norm. And thank God, I mean, I actually went into respiratory failure. I was dependent on oxygen for 14 years prior to my transplant during the night, and for 2 years all around the clock, even in the daytime before my transplant. And finally, my lungs gave out, and essentially went into respiratory failure, which is an experience I would never, ever wish upon anybody.
No, I remember hearing you tell your story previously, and I think at the time you were saying that your sister and you would take turns beating on each other's lungs or back or chest just to clear your lungs.
Yes, to clear the secretions in our lungs. We had to
And it took
do
hours.
percussion, exactly. Every treatment was about 30 to 45 minutes, and then we did it 3 to 5 times a day. So somehow we fit normal life in that. There was nothing normal about that lifestyle. But once I woke up with new lungs,
Well, you said you went into respiratory
I
failure.
did,
What happened?
yes.
And did this happen to your sister too?
no, my sister gradually declined and was dependent on oxygen, was on the waiting list, was still able to function, and actually she went to work the day that she got called for her transplant. So her decline was sort of steady, and she was in good condition when she was called for her transplant. But for me, my health kind of precipitously declined, and I went into respiratory failure. What that means is essentially my carbon dioxide became very high that I went into a coma. I coded, I stopped breathing, and I had a very strong spiritual experience.
Were you in the hospital at the time?
I was at Stanford Hospital. And then I just remember a lot of noises and bright lights and a lot of blank moments. And then I woke up and I saw my doctor and I said, "Did I get a transplant?" And she said, "Yes."
Ah.
And so while I was on a ventilator in ICU, at the same time somewhere else in California was a young man on a ventilator in ICU. And for some reason, I was able to wake up and he wasn't.
So, were you on a waiting list at the time?
I was. I
And
was on the waiting list.
How long had you been on the waiting list?
I had been on the waiting list for 2 weeks. So it was nothing short of a true miracle.
How did you happen to spend 2 weeks? And Gilda tells us that she was on for 4 years.
Yes.
The number of people waiting for lungs is dramatically less than those waiting for kidneys. Maybe Gilda can say more about that.
Yeah.
Well, before she does, you're going to say something?
I was going
Ayana?
to say right now, the average wait time in California for kidneys is 7 to 9 years.
So let us, many people think that you're moved up on the list if you have money. Let's say like Steve Jobs.
That's definitely a myth.
Is it a
We
myth?
hear that a lot.
If you're a celebrity.
Right, if you're Beyonce,
No.
you're gonna get scooted
Are
up
you
to the top.
sure? Some people may find that hard to believe.
I know. We bring that up a lot when we're presenting in high schools. And definitely there's that thought that sure, if you're Beyonce, if you're LeBron, you're going to go to the top of the list. But the beauty of the national waiting list is that it is governed by the United Network of Organ Sharing, UNOS. And it is strictly sort of managed according to all sorts of variables, age, blood type, how long you've been waiting, how sick you are. There are all these different variables. So there is not this sort of fear that you can curry favor and ascend the list. It's done very democratically. It's done in conjunction with all the transplant centers to ensure that people have every opportunity to get that second chance at life, because there are so many people waiting that we have to try and be as equitable as we can.
No, I read that the person who donates doesn't pay, but the donor family pays.
The recipient's insurance pays.
Aha, because I was going to say, you have to have some type of means. And if you don't have any insurance, what happens if you have no insurance?
Well, that's a tough conundrum, obviously. You know, we know folks who've done fundraising. There have been instances where the medical team has been very generous and they've done pro bono, sort of in-kind transplants. But that is a huge reason as to why more people cannot, you know, receive the gift of life is because they don't have adequate insurance. And so I think when a person's in that scenario, you know, there's all kind of wrangling, and obviously we can't solve the healthcare challenges around coverage, but you do have to have insurance, not only for the procedure, but for the aftercare, because you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars to maintain your anti-rejection medications.
Sure.
I think it's important to also emphasize that donor families never have to pay to
Right.
donate their loved one's organs. This is truly an altruistic, a generosity-based decision. There's never an expense for
I would think that's absolutely ridiculous. The idea that here your family, a family member's going to donate something and you would have to pay. I mean,
Right.
that would limit it all right there. I mean,
Right,
you
right,
know.
right.
So, Gilda, we've heard some of Isabel's story. What happened with you in terms of having a kidney problem?
Actually, I didn't even have no signs at all. I didn't even get sick. It's just that it's just started with a cough. And I said, oh, it's just a regular cough. I'm just going to take medication and that's it. I'll be fine. And it progressed to like months. And then my husband would say, why don't you go to the doctor, make an appointment, go to the doctor. And okay, finally, I said, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor because there's sometimes at nighttime when I lie down and I couldn't even breathe. And my face started swelling. And I said, okay, this is something else now. It's not like regular cough. So finally, I went to the doctor. That was Friday. And the doctor told me, he told me, oh, you have pneumonia, but I want you to go get a blood draw. And I'll get back with you when I get the result. So that's Friday, and then Monday night, I just came back from work, and me and my husband was watching the TV, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and he said, hi, doctor, this is your doctor, and he said, I got the result of your blood draw, and he told me there's no more time to waste. Both of your kidneys failed.
Both of them.
Yes.
Did you have any indication at all?
Not at all.
I mean, everything seemed normal to you, functioning normally to you?
I just came back from work that time when he called.
Eating and drinking and elimination, everything was normal?
Yes.
And both kidneys had failed?
Yeah. So he told me, no more time to waste. I'll be waiting for you in the emergency room. And the time, to tell you the truth, I don't know what is kidney functions in my body. So I started crying. The way he said, no, there's no more time to waste, it's like, oh my God, that's something horrible or something very important. So when I told my husband, okay, doctor, I started crying, and he said, what's wrong with you? And he said, Dr. Moretti told me that, both of my kidneys failed. And he grabbed the phone, and he said, no, that's wrong, you got the wrong.
And that's not time to get a second opinion.
And he said, yeah, because he couldn't believe, because I wasn't sick at all. I wasn't.
Except for your cough and
Yeah.
your face swelling. And
Yeah.
how do you have two kidneys fail simultaneously?
They said I might be born with a small kidneys, and
Oh,
through
really?
through the years, no one could ever tell.
It wasn't a virus or anything.
No.
What caused your cough? A backup in your system of?
It's just regular cough. Probably
Mucus
it's
or-
it's because of the weather, and he told me that pneumonia, and I was like, okay,
Ah.
that's the first thing that he told me. But he told me go for the blood draw. That's when they find out the whole
Well,
thing.
when he said there's no time to waste, meet him in the emergency
I was so
room.
scared.
That was not for a transplant. What was that for?
He told me both of your kidneys failed, and me and my husband couldn't believe that. So finally we gave in and said, okay, we went, and the doctor was there waiting for, actually there's a bunch of doctors there. There's cardiologists, there's nephrologists, and my primary doctor, and it's like, oh my God, what's going on? And he said, you guys get the wrong person. She's not sick at all. See, she just came from work. And then he said, this is the result. And they were showing it to my husband, and they said, like, you know, if you want it, we're gonna do the same test. So they did the same test, and everything came out the same thing. And right then, they admitted me, and they put a catheter here, and I went to dialysis.
Kidney
Right there.
dialysis.
Yeah.
And how long did you stay in the hospital?
I guess I stayed in the hospital for 8 days, 1 week, and then I started going dialysis into West Bay nephrologist, and they told me you have to go to the list for kidney transplant, and I waited for you. And actually, they told me it was like, you know, waiting period would be like 6 to 8 years. Yeah, so I was like, okay. So I was on dialysis for 4 years, and there's one time that like I lost hope already, because like 6 to 8 years is like, oh my God, I don't think I'll be able to wait for that. It's very hard.
So you finally got a call one day, I assume.
Yes, we were in Mission Santa Ines in Solvang. It's my birthday.
Oh.
Yeah, and
Ooh, a birthday present
yeah,
that you didn't know was coming.
I don't.
So you just got a call.
Yeah, actually, we were getting inside, right in front of the door of Mission Santa Ines Church in Solvang, and my phone rang, and I thought it's my friend because they told me that, you know, we're gonna take you out for lunch, but I didn't tell them that we're going to Solvang, and my husband told me, it's like, you know, turn off that phone.
Oh.
He told me, turn off the phone. We're out of town. It's your birthday, and I want you to enjoy. And he said, oh, this is your case nurse at UCSF.
You could tell by the number.
Yeah. And she told me, we got a match for you, and we'll be waiting for, I want you to come here at UCSF right now. But then there's a problem because we're like 200 miles away from San Francisco. So I was like, so what's going to be the problem? Because, you know, we're too far, and we just get there.
In time.
Yeah.
You turned around and drove back.
Yeah, and my husband said, okay, we're going to go back. This is more important, you know, forget about your birthday. So instead of celebrating, we stopped by.
And that was one kidney. One kidney.
They gave me
transplant.
I got 2 kidneys.
Oh,
It's
from the same person.
Yeah, from a baby boy. That's all I know.